For this lesson, we're going to start using percent proportions. And a percent proportion is when we can set up a proportion that compares our part over our whole equal to the percent over 100. And we're going to take a look at a few examples to kind of show us for that. So for our first example, if we have 12 is what percent of 32, we need to think of what is the question actually asking us. So I have a few different words in here that let me know what I'm going to set up for my proportion. And remember that my proportion needs to have the part over the whole equals the percent to the over 100. So I have 12, and we have this is word, and so is means equals. What percent of means multiplication. And I'm actually going to make that a dot instead of the x, just so we don't get confused with the variable. So I'm going to have 12 over 32 equals my x over 100. And then I'm going to cross multiply. So I'm going to have 12 times 100. So I get 1200 equals 32x. And I know that I set my proportion up correctly because I'm going to have 12, and there's my equal sign to the what percent of 32. So the percent, right here, this percent and that 32 needs to be multiplied. And I can tell by how I set my proportion up that the 32 and the x are being multiplied because I have 32x. And then I can divide by 32 on both sides. And I get that x is equal to 37.5. And since x is already over 100, that's 35% is my answer. So 12 is 37.5% of 32. Let's take a look at another example. We're going to have that 15 is what percent of 20. So I'm going to follow the same thing. So I have to have 15 is tells me equals that what percent. And I don't know what that percent is, so we're just going to call it x. And the percents are always over 100. And I know that I need to multiply the percent by 20, so my 20 has to be my denominator. When I cross multiply, I'm going to get 1500 equals 20x. And then when I divide by 20 on both sides, I'm going to get that x equals 75%. For this example, we have what percent of 5 is 12. So go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try this one on your own. If you notice, we could say that 12 is what percent of 5. So I'm still going to follow that. So I see that I have to multiply my percent and my 5 together. So I'm going to have 5 as my denominator. And then I'm going to multiply by whatever my percent is. So there's my other side of my proportion. And 12 is what I'm looking at. And so I have 1200 divided by 5x. When I divide by 5 on both sides, I'm going to get x equals 240%. What number is 15.5% of 40? So I see that I have the what number is, so I don't know what my number is, equals, and here's my percent and times my 40. So I know that those have to be opposite each other. So I'm going to have my x over 40 equals 15.5 over 100. And I can tell that I set my proportion up correctly because 40 and 15.5 are across from each other. When I multiply those together, I'm going to get that 100x equals 620. And when I divide by 100 on both sides, I'm going to get x equals 6.2. So 6.2 is 15.5% of 40. What is 11.4% of 33 or 330? So here is what I'm multiplying together. So I'm going to have that 11.4 over 100 equals whatever that number is that I don't know, over 330. And here I have, when I cross multiply, those two are going to be multiplied together. So I'm going to get 100x equals, and then 11.4 times 330 is 3,762. And when I divide by 100, I'm going to get 37.6. So 37.62 is 11.4% of 330. Go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try this one on your own. So we're going to find whatever that 15.3% of 425 is. And so when I multiply, I'm going to get 425 times 15.3. And I'm going to get 6,500 into 0.5 equals 100x. And when I divide by 100, I'm going to get 65.025 equals x. For our final examples, we are still going to use our percent proportions, but we have to figure out what I'm solving for. So 78 is 60% of what number? So here 78 is, so I'm just going to follow my mathematical sentence. So 78 is 60% of what number? And I don't know what that number is. And here I have that 60% times the number. And when I set my proportion up, those are across from each other. So I'm going to get 7,800 equals 60x. I'll divide by 60 on both sides, and I get that x equals 130. So 78 is 60% of 130. Go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try these two examples on your own. 30%, so here's my 30% of what number is 63. So 63 over whatever that what number is. So I'm going to get 30 equals 6,300, or 30x equals 6,300. And when I divide by 30 on both sides, I'm going to get that x is 210. So 30% of 210 is 63. For our final example, we have 45 is 3% of what number? So I'm going to have 45 over what number equals 3 over 100. So 3x equals 4,500. When I divide by 3 on both sides, I'm going to get that x equals 1,500.